uh, cities around the Portland metro area this week, and one of their staff was telling me they regularly spend $1,500 per beaver to control beavers up there. The going rate that I often hear cited in the Portland metro area is $1,000 a beaver. As a wildlife control operator, there is no incentive for me to mention coexistence at those prices. It's a conflict of interest with my business to promote a $40 fix with fencing. I put in a lot of pond levelers, and those are a lot of work. And it's a lot of work compared to the trapping, which is so highly incentivized. So I just wanted, I think if you take anything away from my testimony, that's what I wanted to highlight for you, is that there's marking conditions at play here. And those come into bear when we ask WCOs to put forward a proactive outreach around coexistence. Just, I'd like you to acknowledge that this is the market that we're in. And so any requirements where they have to educate the landowners first, that's going to be actively taking business away from their business model. That said, I'm very much in support of the suggestion that there's outreach material that required. Most of the landowners I work with, they say, oh, I wish I would have heard about this earlier. I've spent 5 years on the trapping treadmill. I want to get off of it just as much as anybody else, right? The WCOs that I talk to say, why would I ever tell a landowner about electric fence when I can show up to the same place over and over again and remove beavers? That's returning business. And so that's the landscape, right? And I think the leadership that ODFNW staff has shown, it's perfectly primed to then use this bill as an opportunity to get materials to landowners. So with all that, I agree it's a big deal. Congratulations to all involved, and thank you.
Sorry. Kate Kaufman? Aiden Bassett, are you there?
There's Kate.
Go ahead,
This is
Kate.
Yes. Hi, this is Kate Kaufman. Chair Wall, Director Furbearer, and Commissioners, thank you for having me attend. I am a concerned citizen, and I am a volunteer with BARC in Portland who does advocacy on Mount Hood. I have very little personal expertise in this matter, but I have a lot of passion and interest in seeing water restoration and beaver partnerships occur. And I want to thank everybody in this room, including the speakers, including the legislators who passed these bills, for taking beaver seriously. And what I am hearing us do is we are shifting our value and our understanding of beaver from predators to partners. And the work that you're doing is starting to see them as partners in our work to restore our world and address climate change. I agree fully with all of the speakers who have gone before me, and so I won't beleaguer their points. What I would like to advocate for is that the current removal of the term predator and providing permitting, I don't believe goes far enough. And I am really optimistic and hopeful that ODFW is on a journey, and the next stages will strengthen how we're partnering with beaver. What I would like to advocate for is, as you are creating educational materials, center the word partner as you talk about beaver. Helping agricultural farmers and landowners on the assets that beaver bring to their communities and to their land, and even to their pocketbook, I think can do a lot in shifting the narrative with our beaver populations. If you can highlight how water restoration on property is actually a net positive for agricultural business, if you can start providing incentives and advocate for incentives for landowners to create wetland with beaver on their properties, and maybe take a look at your own languaging. Languaging is a powerful tool, and as a novice and somebody who doesn't exist in your spheres often, I have been interested to hear you talk about conflict, damage, and taking as buzzwords that you use with maybe not a lot of like thought. All of those center the human's value of productivity, monetary success, and control of a landscape. So if you start to use language that starts to see beavers as partners on the page and in your own languaging, it may start to help humans see beaver as more than just a nuisance. I'll end there and let other experts speak more eloquently about things, but I do thank you for listening and considering.
Thank you for your testimony, Kate. And then we'll move to Aiden and then Sally Compton. So Aiden?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Chair Wall, Director Colbert, Commissioners, my name is Aiden Bassett. I live in Lane County, and I work for Cascadia Wildlands, a founding member of the Oregon Wildlife Coalition. I comment today in support of the reclassification of beavers as fur bearers on private lands and ODFW's efforts to promote non-lethal coexistence methods. More work is needed to fully implement HB 3464, however, including the following steps. ODFW should use new data to create a public map of beaver distribution and conflict hotspots. ODFW should require landowner reports of beaver take within 2 weeks of a take, instead of reporting every 6 months, as is currently the practice. In conflict hotspots, ODFW's beaver biologist should engage with landowners and provide resources to prevent further take of beavers, and ODFW should disclose all such work. Permitting and restrictions on the take of beavers outside of harvest season on private lands must apply to anyone who kills beavers on private lands. ODFW's field offices should be the first point of contact for landowners seeking to secure a permit for taking beavers outside of the harvest season, which would allow ODFW to propose non-lethal measures to those landowners. Before a landowner contacts a wildlife control operator to kill a beaver on their property, they should also be required to contact ODFW. Wildlife control operators must be required to give non-lethal coexistence educational materials to landowners provided by ODFW when they are contacted to kill a beaver, since there is a significant conflict of interest in that operators profit from killing wildlife. Wildlife control operators should, in the event of a take, be required to clarify how a beaver posed a risk of damage. A beaver's mere presence, as others have stated, must not be considered a threat of damage. Every year, Oregon is ravaged by wildfires, drought, and water quality issues that impact everyone. Beavers contribute to natural climate solutions that can help mitigate and reduce wildlife impacts, improve stream temperature and quality, provide refuge to wildlife and livestock during drought, and act as natural carbon sinks with their wetlands and ponds. Oregon's fragile ecosystems can greatly benefit from the presence of this keystone species, and opportunities to influence how this species is managed are rare. The Commission should consider this rulemaking part of ODFW's response to climate change and prioritize coexistence with beavers to protect our landscapes for fish and wildlife and for future generations of Oregonians. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony.
Thank you, Aiden. Could we go to Sally Compton, please? Sally?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thanks. My name is Sally Compton, and I'm the Executive Director of Think Wild. Think Wild's BeaverWorks Oregon program has been working for quite a few years with landholders in Central and Eastern Oregon to develop and implement non-lethal beaver conflict mitigation strategies for both long-term and affordable solutions for all the stakeholders. BeaverWorks also works with landholders and agencies, including OPRD and our regional watershed councils, to advise on and execute community-based beaver habitat planting projects. And our staff includes a permitted wildlife control operator. So with this context, you can imagine that we are very excited to see the progress of this bill. And I'd like to start with the key areas of the proposed rulemaking that we support. We are in support that the proposed rules do explicitly clarify whether and under which conditions to authorize a person to take a beaver without a permit. And more specifically, we support the definition of the term public nuisance as it pertains to beavers, where the beaver itself must be the source of the nuisance and not just a vocal or adamant public, as well as the definition of the term imminent threat, and that the presence of a beaver does not substantiate an imminent threat. We support the proposed changes to record and make public beaver take data as including the location and the reason for the take, as this information will be extremely valuable as a public data set to track beaver and human conflict and to serve as a proxy for measuring beaver populations, both for research institutions and for nonprofits like ourselves. In addition to the areas of support, we do also have suggestions for revision and/or clarification within the proposed rulemaking. Once a term is defined in the rules, we encourage consistency in the use of that term throughout to ensure consistent interpretation. For example, the rules define imminent threat of a beaver for the criteria for lethal removal, but then there's other terms throughout the rulemaking that could be interpreted differently for the same criteria. The rules also state that the owner or designee of the owner must first request the department to address the threat to infrastructure apparently posed by the beaver, and that the owner wait 30 days after making the request. There is limited explanation of via what means and scope the department is required to address that threat within those 30 days. We want the rules to clarify that a wildlife control operator is not a proxy for the department and should be subjected to the same requirements as a private landowner. Wildlife control operators should not be a replacement representative and rule interpreter for private landowners just because they have permits. And just like Jacob said, the financial conflict of interest doesn't really encourage them to move a landowner from lethal options to non-lethal. Finally, the cost of compliance overview indicates that time will be allotted to handling complaints, issuing permits, and cataloging mortalities, but it doesn't really mention the time spent advising on and implementing solutions to abate them, which is really the whole goal of these rules. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you can take these comments in the true spirit that we intend so that we can better serve the people and wildlife of Oregon to have the landscape level changes that we're all working to achieve.
Thank you, Sally. We do have one other person who we weren't aware until recently had signed up. So we're going to go ahead with Danielle Moser, and Danielle, you'll also have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me make sure my registration came through. Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Director Colbert, and members of the Commission, my name is Danielle Moser, and I'm the Wildlife Program Manager for Oregon Wild. Thank you for the chance to comment on the beaver take permit rules associated with the passage of HB 3464, a bill that changed the statutory classification of beavers on private land. This is an important step forward in the effort to support beaver resilience and coexistence across all lands in Oregon. And in doing so, restore ecosystem health, aid in groundwater retention, mitigate wildfire impacts, and much more. The Oregon Wildlife Coalition, a group of wildlife conservation organizations, submitted comments detailing the importance of HB 3464 and the rule changes before you today. I'd like to highlight a few of those benefits. The fact that this puts sideboards on killing beaver on private land. It changes the jurisdictional authority from Department of Ag to ODF&W, which will help improve continuity and consistency and allow for a comprehensive approach to data collection and beaver restoration and management. Directs ODFW to support and promote the use of non-lethal measures in mitigating conflict. So as you finalize the specific rule changes today, I encourage you to ensure that the reporting process for when beavers are to be killed is clear and transparent. By collecting this necessary data, ODFW can better identify conflict hotspots and focus on mitigating that conflict using non-lethal tools. The passage of HB 3464 provides ODFW and the Commission an opportunity to prioritize and promote beaver coexistence. Doing so will not only help this important keystone species and those impacted communities, but also improve Oregon's ecological health and biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I think we are at the end. Brian, if you'd like to come back up, if you would, please, and we'll see if we have comments or questions from the commissioners. You might have worn them down, Brian. There aren't very many questions. I have one question just about, we have currently much better information than we did when we were talking about this 2 years ago or 1 year ago. And so we have, and we also know where some of the conflict areas are, if you will. I just want to clarify that that's the case. I don't want to deal with it in this one, but in the next rule. I just want to make sure that's there, because the the areas where there are hotspots seems to be the area that we should focus on. And so I'll talk about it in the next one. Commissioners, is there a motion if you have no other questions?
I'll make the motion, Chair Wall. No problem. I move to amend Oregon Administrative Rule Division 002, 043, 045, and 435 as proposed by staff.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to amend Oregon Administrative Rule Divisions 002, 043, and 045 and 435 as read into the record. And I'll ask for a thumb vote in just a second. But I do want to just take one more second to recognize what a big deal this is that we have moved to this and how it's one more key step in what we've been doing over the last 2.5 years on beaver and looking at them differently than we were in the past. So as tired as we are, I had to say that. So thank you. Let's do a thumb vote, commissioners. Those in favor? It's unanimous. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we will do item F. Thank you. Say? Oh.
Perfect timing. We lost the YouTube again, so that was good.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon. Chair Wall, members of the commission, Director Colbert, for the record, Derek Broman, I'm the game program manager. And today we're going to be talking about the Furbearer regulations and adopting that rule set. So I'll try to be quick. And so there's the outline of what I'm going to be talking about. And starting off, you typically hear about the Furbearer program and its rules every 2 years. We adopt our rules in June of the even years. But what people don't realize or often forget is that the Furbearer program is pretty large and pretty robust. And it has a number of, keep using the word pillars, that prop up that program. And in fact, much of the time and a lot of the resources are spent on conservation and management, especially of conservation strategy species and threatened and endangered species, where forest carnivores and those types occupy an enormous amount of time and energy and focus for the Furbearer program. But today we're primarily going to be talking about regulations and harvest. And so just wanted to caveat that this is just a small sliver of that program that we're discussing today. So regarding our regulations for the Furbearer program and for our licensed fur takers, oftentimes things kind of fall into these three bins or drivers for the types of general regulations that we have. One is regarding to mandatory reporting. So we have a very rigorous mandatory reporting process for licensed fur takers, mandatory check-ins, providing a biological data. We also have a long list of regulations that come from interest from the fur takers themselves, but also the public, addressing things like ensuring that there's trapper education or the design of traps, the locations of traps, those types of things, and also area closures. And then there's other factors that regularly are considered and incorporated into our regulations, including things like new science, such as the latest genetic findings or human dimensions research, new policy, whether that's at the local scale or oftentimes at the international scale for these regulations, and new information from research and from best management practices. And then also, as usual, with a lot of our regulations, having that law enforcement component, try to make sure that we have things that are appropriate and can address our needs and concerns. Oh, sorry. And so for staff, we are proposing to maintain these general regulations for this next 2-year process, next 2-year period. So finally, going into the specific information on species and seasons, I'm going to start with bobcats. And bobcats are perhaps the greatest species of interest to fur takers in Oregon. And it's fortunately, for that animal, we have the greatest amount of data and information available to closely track bobcat populations and also will evaluate harvest to ensure that it is sustainable. In addition to mandatory harvest reporting data, bobcat pelts must be checked in for tagging and jaws submitted. That means that we have excellent biological information to complement our detailed harvest information. This large amount of bobcat data and the ability to evaluate population demographics indicates that we have a robust and healthy bobcat population and that harvest is low and sustainable, including in Eastern Oregon where we see the greatest effort and harvest. And so as such, on the bobcat front, we are proposing to maintain the current bobcat regulations and bag limits. Shifting over to beaver now, there's going to be a number of areas of focus that I'll be talking about here. So going back to that slide regarding the allocation of time and attention in the Furbearer program, one major goal of the program when it comes to population conservation and management is to very simply have robust populations of native species that are widespread throughout their range and are resilient to adversity. And that doesn't have anything to do with allowable harvest, but simply ensuring Oregon's wildlife is doing well. Fortunately for many fur bearers, including beaver, they are the rarest habitat in the state, and monitoring suggests population stability and resiliency. After satisfying those primary goals of population health, we can then advance to greater needs and desires while also taking a more holistic approach.
Well, you got our attention.
So we can take a more holistic approach, and that's where we find ourselves with the Beaver Action Plan, where we want more than just healthy populations. You've all seen this image before, but the Beaver Action Plan goal is to take action in the short term to accelerate the restoration of beaver habitat and beaver modified habitat at the landscape scale in Oregon. And to achieve this goal, the plan is structured with 4 integrated pillars of action. Each is outlined with specific commitments and steps the department will take on landscape scale restoration of beaver habitat and beaver modified habitats where appropriate across Oregon. This plan helps us to implement and identify opportunities to improve adaptive management and coordination across ODFW divisions and the field programs. Today, we're going to focus on the beaver management pillar of the Beaver Action Plan. We'll likely be giving an update on the Beaver Action Plan in September, but I'll just be focusing on the relevant pieces of the beaver management pillar now, which include the actions items of completing requirements of private forest accord data collection and monitoring of beaver conflict, expanding partnerships for collaboration and coexistence on public and private lands, developing outreach for new PFA beaver coexistence strategies, and improvements to beaver harvest data collection and monitoring. I'll first touch on the 3D item, then I'll hit a bit on the 3A item. The 3D pillar directs the department to implement new beaver harvest reporting requirements and track beaver harvest data to support responsible trapping management and implementation of other beaver management authorities. Prior to 2022, we had really good harvest data, and that harvest data allowed us to look at things at the county scale, at the statewide scale, gives us information on catch per unit effort, number of animals released, and so we were able to regularly look at things at those smaller scales than just the statewide scale. And there, that graph represents statewide harvest of beaver dating back about 30, 40 years now. And you can see at the statewide scale, we have harvest that's pretty low the last decade, about half of what it was a decade ago. However, this level of information simply was not good enough to address the major questions at hand. To address these questions, during our last Furbearer rule adoption in June 2022, we greatly expanded our beaver harvest information to include key data fields, including watersheds. I'll caveat now, I'm going to call a watershed and a huck interchangeably, so I apologize if I flip-flop, but I mean the same thing. So we have watersheds, land ownership, water feature, and fur taker intent. And I'm not going to present a lot of information on the fur taker intent at this time, but I can certainly help address questions later if you have them. So first off, this is the data from the last 2 years after we made that change, and you see that asterisk on 2023. I just want to point out that we will still be collecting fur taker information all the way until early 2025. So while this year is not truly complete, it is mostly complete. And in fact, when it comes to the beaver information, we had all of our reporting infrastructure in place. So a lot of times I'm going to be presenting a lot of the 2023 data for the next couple slides, just because it does seem to have fewer holes in the 2022 data. But looking at the data between those 2 years, we had a harvest just over 1,000 in 2022 and almost 1,500 in 2023. That increase is likely due to some increased market prices, but as you saw on a couple slides earlier, we're still at a very low harvest rate when looking at harvest over time. Despite this low harvest, we still see actually very high catch per unit effort. And so harvest did occur in most counties for both of those years, but when looking at the watersheds, we see that that actually occurs in about only half of the state. These tables here in this slide are also the same tables 2, 3, and 4 in attachment 3 of the packet. And the one on the left showing the water feature breakdown by year, and on the right, the land ownership breakdown by year. Over the last 2 years, 57% of harvest occurred on rivers, followed by ditches and creeks that were both at 14%. For land ownership, 50% of harvest occurred on private land, followed by 37% on navigable rivers, which makes quite a deal of sense considering the prevalence of rivers in the water feature data. Although this is just 2 years of this expanded harvest data, the findings are consistent with previous understandings by our staff, having repeatedly communicated with Oregon beaver fur takers. So I don't want to get too hung up in this map. This is how the data was historically observed at the county level. And note that for most counties, harvests are quite low, with 4 counties not having any harvest, and this is for 2023. And really about a half dozen or so counties represent the majority of the harvests in the state and are found in Western Oregon, Western Oregon, Northwest Oregon, and in parts of far Eastern Oregon. Now, when you display that same data at a finer scale of the watershed, you can see a much different picture here, where harvest is even less common and more greatly dispersed than the majority of it occurring in just a handful of these watersheds that are often associated with rivers like the Willamette and the Columbia rivers. And hopefully this works, but I'm going to flip back and forth a little bit just for the demonstration to show how valuable it is to have this information at a finer scale. Because if you just look at the county scale, it looks like harvest is statewide, especially if you look at things like Malheur County. For those that know where that is, it's the very southeasternmost county. It kind of had this impression that there's high harvest or that there's harvest occurring across that large geography. However, when you flip it over and just look at the watershed scale, you can see it's very much just limited to the northern portion of the county, where mostly agricultural areas near the Snake River. And so this finer scale is really valuable because we're going from 36 counties to 91 watersheds. That's a 3-fold increase in our spatial scale, which is great. Looking at land ownership by watershed, you can see some common trends as well, with a lot of harvest occurring on open water, which is represented by that blue color, and private land in the pinkish orange. And the size of the pie charts correlate with the harvest total. And so you can see a lot of those larger pie charts occurring in Western Oregon, Northwest Oregon. Looking at the water feature type, you can see a large proportion occurring on rivers in the light blue, and streams in the dark blue, and ditches and channels in the light green. And again, you can see statewide, you have pockets of where this is occurring, and certain trends or norms with the water feature and the land ownership type, but then other areas almost completely devoid of any take. When we overlay these counties and these watersheds, we now have hundreds of unique spatial units to use in data exploration. And so here on this graph, it's a little bit noisy, but I've broken down some of the information in the watersheds with the highest harvest. And I've broken them down into the county, the watershed, the water feature, and the land ownership type. And at this finest scale, we don't have a lot of concerns regarding the level of harvest based on the location, nor are there current concerns regarding undesirable effects from harvest in these locations, especially in regards to the Beaver Action Plan goal of increasing beaver modified habitats. We found, when looking at the data over the last 2 years, there's been low harvest statewide relative to historic harvest, but high catch per unit effort. Harvest is limited in distribution, and the majority occurs in a half dozen or so watersheds. Harvest predominantly occurs on private land and open water and on rivers, and most notably, much less present on streams that could be dammed by beavers. There appears to be limited overlap with our beaver emphasis areas and other watersheds of interest, such as areas of habitat restoration work. Another action item in the Beaver Action Plan is conflict monitoring and response, where we want to dig in deeper on ongoing conflict. And we heard that a lot in the previous agenda item. At the same time, there are reporting requirements associated with the Private Forest Accord regarding beavers taken on private forest land. In 2023, ODFW received 121 beaver complaints, mostly in regards to landscaping, threatening infrastructure, dikes and roadways, and agriculture. Of those reports, only 11 beaver were taken, and the vast majority of the time, advice is provided on long-term solutions to avoid conflict. The Private Forest Accord requires ODFW to report to the Commission on any beavers taken on private forest land, and we will use the Wildlife Damage Database and the Fur Taker Harvest Database to maintain those records. And so for 2023, 6 of those 121 complaints were associated with private forest land and no beavers were taken. In the 2023-2024 harvest season, 8 beaver were taken on small private forest land. The Beaver Action Plan directs staff to closely track beaver harvest data to support responsible trapping management and the implementation of other beaver management authorities. This is to meet the Beaver Action Plan's ultimate goal of accelerating the restoration of beaver habitat and beaver modified habitat at the landscape scale in Oregon. Following that guidance, and after assessing harvest information and also taking into consideration conflict information, staff recommend maintaining this rigorous beaver harvest reporting and maintain current season structures. Although no evaluation of effectiveness has occurred, staff also recommend maintaining the 16 beaver-specific harvest closure areas that average 51 years in duration and predominantly occur on federal land. Staff feel that these recommendations are well supported by the data and is in alignment with the Beaver Action Plan direction. Decision-making in the future will also greatly benefit from the new information that will come from the beaver take permits adopted in the preceding agenda item. Shifting away from beaver, as I think all of you were on the September commission tour, we heard a presentation from Callie Atkins regarding the Sierra Nevada red fox, which is a subspecies of red fox that occurs in the Oregon Cascades, also known as snurf, and so I'll save some time in syllables and call them snurf from here on out. They're found at high elevations in the Oregon Cascades, primarily on the eastern slopes, actually not too far from here. ODFW and partners have been rigorously researching the Oregon snurf population for the last decade, and there are some major demographic questions that we want to answer, like size, location, connectivity, and trajectory. And want to say that this species or the subspecies extends into California, where one of the DPSs is federally listed. So to answer some of these questions is a major interest also to California, as they have actually requested Oregon snurf as a source population for translocations to their Lassen population. Through the development of the conservation strategy for the snurf, harvest was not identified as a limiting factor in Oregon, and harvest is quite rare. However, with these major questions at hand, wildlife managers wanted to hit pause on any allowable take until we had answers to those major questions. So staff discussed a possible closure with potential affected parties, and there seemed to be good agreement to proceed with a well thought out red fox closure area covering the range of the snurf in the Oregon Cascades. Therefore, staff are proposing to enact a red fox harvest closure within an area 15 miles from the Pacific Crest Trail. And this would extend from the Washington border down to where the PCT meets Interstate 5. And why we did that at I-5 was that the PCT takes a hard left down there, and we would be expanding into areas that aren't intended to be snurf habitat. It could also have some impacts on other animals as well. And we want to remind folks this is just a red fox harvest closure. So things like gray fox harvest would still occur, which actually in some of our fisher conservation efforts, we're finding out there might be a great deal of competition occurring there. So still allowing gray fox harvest, especially down in Southern Oregon, would actually be a good thing to make sure that we don't unintentionally restrict. So wrapping up here, I apologize for the brevity, but it's helpful for time. Regarding a lot of our other species-specific recommendations, we are proposing to maintain no closed seasons for unprotected mammals. We propose to maintain no open season for protected species. We want to maintain harvest seasons for fur bearers and maintain our pursuit seasons as well. So wrapping up, again, this is normally where I'd like to have just a more of an opportunity to describe all the great things being done by the Furbearer program, but we'll just keep it succinct. But I do at least want to get the note that we will soon, we're in the process of working on an online trapper education option. And we will also hopefully soon here have the ability for licensed fur takers to renew their licenses through ELS rather than currently having to go through our licensing. So Dr. King, just wanted to make sure I said that on the record for you. I'm just one step ahead when I can be. And so with that, I'm done on my presentation. I'm happy to address any questions. Otherwise, we can take them after public comment.
Yeah, Dr. King, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairwell. Thank you, Derek. You know, I've got to get a question in. The only trapper up here, and you and I always have chats about that. Okay, while I support fully what is happening with how we're doing, how we've changed beaver from predatory animals to simply fur bearers and all that, it's starting to get now this patchwork. Like you can trap them on private land under the private forest accord if it's a certain acreage, but otherwise you need this beaver take permit. And then public's different again. Like, so can you kind of start to make sense of that for me on the record?
I think this might be a tag team because now she's getting into more of like the complexities of the permit, because otherwise, from the Division 50 fur taker rules, little changes. In the eyes of those individuals venturing onto private property, so long as they're not the landowner or the agent, that animal was always a beaver to them. And so licensed fur takers going onto private land, nothing changes unless they were to be the landowner or the agent. And so it's a complicated narrative. And fortunately, now with rule adoption, we don't ever have to talk about it again because it's just a fur bearer is a fur bearer is a fur bearer, regardless of the location. But I can let Brian try to step through the matrix of what's changing with these new rules.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Wall, Commissioner King, it is complicated. Yeah. And that's what happens when you have different pieces of legislation tackling different areas. And so it's complicated. It helps that now beavers are simply a fur bearer, but then within the private forest accord, damage is different on private forest lands, those over 5,000 acres. Beavers can't be taken for damage unless it's damage to or imminent threat of infrastructure. And so tree damage that used to be damaged doesn't apply anymore. And as you saw in the data, that we have, there was very little beaver conflict that was associated with that infrastructure. And then there's the small private forest landowners that have some more of the, they're a little bit simpler. They're still response to damage, tree damage can count as damage. And there's a provision within that last bill, House Bill 3464, that allows take without a permit. I think one of the take without a permit, if beavers have the potential to cause damage on those properties, if they're present and have the potential. So that gets a little bit more complicated. I think one of the big keys is really training up some of our landowners to talk to their district office when they have conflict for fur takers, which is what this rule set's dealing with. Those fur takers are operating under the fur bearer seasons, and for landowners, especially forest landowners, agricultural landowners, it's very helpful to have a conversation and find out where their property fits in that agriculture, small private forest, large private forest, and help walk them through, because it's not intuitive, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, and it's about the hotspots. Actually, if we just talk about that for a minute, you described that, the trend line has been down. It's down significantly from what it was a decade ago. And we had a jump or a bump, however you want to call it, from 22 to 23, it went up by 400. And I note that only because I know those can be just blips, but we've been looking at more beaver on the landscape and how do we have fewer dead beaver, basically, if you want to boil it all down. So we have an area, the upper Willamette, the lower Willamette, that have high harvest. And so that's a hotspot conflict area, if you will. And so that one looks like one to look at for what can we do about that. So I would just leave it that open-ended as a quick question, and we can come back to it.
Sure. Well, yeah, I think that one of the things that we're enjoying, weird word, but enjoying with our beaver action plan and having so many divisions and professionals and interested parties at the table is that I think we're really honing in on identifying what the goal is and keeping our eye on the prize, and that is beaver modified habitat. And so while we're looking at these hot spots, conflict, management tools, resources, focus, energy, attention, it's still what is the connection to achieving that goal of beaver modified habitats? And so while we have these watersheds or portions of a watershed that have high harvest, we can now dive into that data and say, well, where is this harvest occurring? And is it potentially going to have an impact on achieving our goal of beaver modified habitat? We're still not there and diving deep enough, I think. But from the first look, most of the harvest is occurring on like the main stem of the Willamette, which beaver do not dam. And so early thought is this isn't the red flag. If say we had high harvest in an area and it was all on streams or focal areas, that would start to rise the concern of like, oh, maybe something needs to happen sooner rather than later. But when it's coming from arguably the population, furnaces where everything's coming from, the factory, that doesn't mean we dismiss it, but it does allow us to have a little bit more pause and caution heading into a deeper dive to find out, is that going to be a problem? Or is it simply beavers on the main stem have high harvest? And that's kind of what you would expect because there's a lot of them there.
Thank you.
So just clarification. So I want to make sure I understand what you just said. So it's on the river system itself, the Willamette River and its tributaries we're not talking riparian habitats in the upper drainages. Is that, help me, Derek, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. I thought you said mostly river systems.
You know what? Yeah, if we have the PowerPoint, we could put that back up. For those playing at home, slide 18, that is, I blew up the upper Willamette, Huck, and broke it out.
Did you define Huck for me?
A hydrological unit code.
Thank you.
And if I go any further, we're talking to fish people because this is their world.
No, I just want to make sure everybody understands.
A watershed, apologize.
Yeah.
So I broke it out by the counties that overlap that watershed, and then you can look at where this harvest occurred. And so you can see that for the water features, most of the harvest was occurring on rivers. And then when it comes to the land ownership, you see navigable water. And so those two together tell the story that somebody is on these large bodies of water because they're probably doing their activities on boat floating through these areas, or they're at least doing things on the banks. And so just again, this ability of this data to go further into the weeds to say it's on a river and it's a navigable river, that says it's probably not dammable. And so that's where we start to get more details on evaluating this risk and issue of potentially impacting beaver modified habitat.
Okay, thank you.
Other question. And just for clarity, it's absolutely clear that what you just said and why that makes sense. I also am not, I think it is still worth looking at as a hotspot because though they are on rivers, they're not damming out, they're not damming streams where we really want the beaver. That's the beaver modified habitat that we all think about. There are also big values from beaver working in these big systems, and as we can see, they're not all just on the main stem. They're also in ditches and that sort of thing. So I think it's really worth keeping in mind that this is a hot spot. Maybe we should think about it. And so I'd like to come back to that after we hear from people.
Sure.
Thank you. And it doesn't look like there are any others. So we will start through the testimony. There are quite a few, and we will start with Senator Smith. Are you on the line, Senator Smith?
Yes. I am, Chair Wall. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I apologize. I'm traveling from Salem back to the beautiful South Coast, which you represent as well, Chair Wall. And I get the opportunity to say for the first time, for me, Director Colbert, thank you so much for all of your great work and for the Beaver Work Group and their efforts. I will be brief. In the testimony submitted, there is a big push to the commission to ban the trapping of beaver on federal land. And as you know, Chair Wall, in your district, and the road to Agnes is a hodgepodge of ownership. Curry County alone has over 3,000 culverts. And a lot of that Agnes Road already has significant issues, especially when it comes to those culverts. And you know better than anyone in that room how they could be stranded up there due to a number of issues. And beaver are one. And so that is just one example on how I would strongly urge the commission not to do that on federal lands. It's critically important that that access remain available. It is a vital component to the uses for those Agnes people to get to and from, as well as the other many roads that crisscross within the landscape, especially in Western Oregon where beaver are so prevalent, and access is so critically important. Again, during the storms that occur so often. So thank you again. Thank everyone there and the staff for all their great work. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Appreciate you taking the time to testify. We will start through the people that will alternate and take people as they signed up. Jim Furnish, Robert Besta, Paul Engelmeyer. The next three after that, Patricia McDowell, Robert Hughes, Ernie Nemi. And we'll start with Jim Furnish, and then the next two are on. No, they aren't. They're here. The first three are all here. So why don't all three of you come up? You'd think I'd get this code at some point. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Wall, the Commission, and Director Colbert. I'm speaking to you virtually from the state of Washington. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a retired deputy chief with the U.S. Forest Service and also a former Siuslaw National Forest supervisor in Oregon's Coast Range. I want to say hello again to Mark. Good to see you again, Mark.
Yes, sir.
I'm here to speak today on behalf of limiting beaver trapping on public lands. I want to mention the word change and humans' natural resistance to change, but also to indicate that the word change also elicits promise and opportunity along with challenges. I want to just speak briefly about my tenure as the Siuslaw National Forest Supervisor from 1992 to 1999, following the spotted owl crisis, navigating our way through all the chaos and upheaval that we endured. Coming out the other side after years of addressing many of those challenges to, I think, arrive at a landscape 30 years later that benefited from embracing change and inducing many practices to let go of many of our old ways of clear-cutting coastal forests and operating on short rotation seasons to adopting ecosystem restoration. And the benefits that this has had to wildlife, fish, landscapes, clean water. I think that landscape is in much better shape today. So my hope is that you will, in fact, act today to bring beaver back in sizable numbers to Oregon's federal lands. I think the impacts will not be immediate, but I think the science is clear that beavers have a tremendous beneficial impact to the lands that they occupy. And I hope that within 10 to 20 years, people in Oregon will begin to see evidence of the benefits of restoring some of these beaver to their federal land waterways if the trapping can be reduced and eliminated. Give the beavers a chance to come back. To me, a healthy beaver population leads to a healthier environment. And I implore the commission to act today to help make that possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Could Robert Besta, and Paul's already up here, could we also, oh, the next one's online. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, Chair Wall and the rest of the fellow commissioners, and welcome on board to the new team. Good. I'm Paul Engelmeyer. I live and work, play, forage in the Central Coast Range, Lincoln and Lane County. And I request that you amend OAR 635050070, the language in order to prohibit trapping and hunting on federally managed lands. This action would reflect the widely known values of having beaver in robust numbers at a landscape scale. From my perspective, this action would actually be an adaptive management action, one that needs to occur to deal with the realities of climate change and the many endangered species that we have in our landscape. ODFW's current coho 12-year review clearly shows we are not increasing beaver pools, identifies as a priority conservation strategy for coho recovery. And there's a recent report that's out, we're going to call it the Jacobs report, indicate 44 of the federally listed T&E species have clear documentation of the value of beaver in their recovery plan. 44 keystone species, really, beavers are for sure. I also am a part of the Mid-Coast Watershed and Watershed Council and have been for 25 years, working to recover coho, water quality, and water quantity for our communities. Our group is only one of 60 such groups in the state, and our group has surpassed $100 million of investments doing work to improve watershed processes. And our landscape is the 1,000,000 acres from Cascade Head on the north of Lincoln City, down to Hasita Head on the south. So we've touched 1 million. You put our 60 watershed councils together, we are at $1.15 billion of restoration work. That's across Oregon. That's to keep Oregon, Oregon. You feel like you can fish, swim in the river, healthy forest. We have to invest. This is what our generation has to do to pass it on in a better condition. And beaver will help for free if we let them. We need them at robust numbers at a landscape scale. And these public lands are critical to the many species, and the beavers are the keystone species that'll link this biodiversity conservation strategy. And I believe it is an intergenerational conservation strategy. I'm working with the offspring of the folks that have raised the flag originally. That first group has retired. Some of us are still working, but the reality of this is intergenerational work. You can climb trees that we planted. This is good news. Things do want to heal in Oregon. Thank you. I wish I had more time.
Thank you, Paul.
Maybe we'll get you out on the coast.
I always like an excuse to get to the coast.
Okay, let's make a plan.
Robert, go ahead.
Chair Wall, Director Colbert, and Commissioners. My name is Robert Beshta. I'm an emeritus professor in the Department of Forest Ecosystems and Society at Oregon State University, and I live in Benton County. Over the last nearly 20 years, I've been involved in research evaluating the ecosystem effects of removing and returning apex predators, known as keystone species, to Western landscapes. Beaver are another keystone species with important ecosystem impacts or effects that can transform Western riparian areas. 4 years ago, I provided public testimony to the Commission regarding the wide-ranging and important ecosystem functions of beaver from a science perspective. These include improving stream flows, trapping sediment, creating wildfire barriers, and increasing vegetation diversity for the fish and wildlife that utilize riparian areas to satisfy their food and habitat requirements. It is these functions and others that make beavers of fundamental importance to the network of streams and rivers that flow across federally managed public lands in Oregon. As our climate continues to change, there is perhaps no greater need on these public lands than that of creating and maintaining habitat diversity and improving natural water storage. Understanding how ecosystems once functioned and the extent that they have changed over time often provides clarity on how to move forward. Beaver were once abundant and widely distributed in Oregon. They were almost everywhere as far as we could tell. 200 years ago, beavers were being extensively trapped across Oregon territory for their fur, and by the mid-1800s, they were largely gone. and most Oregonians know the basics of that story. And in contemporary terms, we would indicate that beavers were, quote, functionally extirpated, unquote, as were the ecosystem benefits that they were providing. So where are we at today? What we see today, based on the abundance of unoccupied riparian habitat on public lands, as well as supporting information from 20 years of ODF and W stream habitat surveys, is that beavers remain functionally extirpated. To be clear, while beavers are found in some parts of Oregon and at landscape scales, their numbers are so low and their spatial distribution so limited that they are unable to provide significant ecological benefits to the wide range of native fish and wildlife species that utilize Oregon's riparian ecosystem, species that the ODF&W is directed to steward. The absence of abundant beaver populations and the compelling need for their ecosystem benefits make it necessary for this commission to eliminate as quickly as possible any human-caused mortality on federally managed public lands, a decision that you can accomplish today and a decision that would allow beavers to again create the diverse habitats that fish, wildlife, and Oregonians need to better navigate a changing climate. Lastly, today is Flag Day. Oregon's flag is distinct from other 49 states in that we have a beaver on the back. People from around the state, the country, and the world know how proud we are of our beavers. However, most do not know that ODF&W continues to allow recreational trapping and hunting of this keystone species on federally managed public lands. Unless this commission stops the ongoing mortality of beavers, I would suggest it may well be time, perhaps long overdue, for Oregonians to remove the symbolic beaver from their state flag. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go then to Patricia McDowell online, and then Robert Hughes, and then people in the room, Ernie Nemi, Stan Steele, and Jacob Shockey. So Patricia McDowell.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Chair Wall, Commissioners, Director Colbert, good afternoon. I'm Pat McDowell. I'm a river geomorphologist, and I've been a professor at University of Oregon for over 40 years. I retired in 2020, but I still teach part-time. I live in Lane County. I've done river research all over Oregon. I've taken hundreds of students out to look at and study Oregon rivers. I've served on a number of local, state, and national government committees concerned with river and watershed management. Today, I'm asking you to close federally managed public lands to beaver trapping and hunting so that our beaver populations can increase. Beavers provide many benefits to society. I want to focus on the climate change aspect. In Oregon, climate change is bringing hotter and drier summers, increasing drought frequency, and increasing wildfires. Oregon's Integrated Water Resources Strategy states, storing water via built and natural systems will be an important tool to meet Oregon's water needs. Beavers are made for this job. Professor Beshta outlined the many benefits that beavers bring, but in particular, they are provide a great water storage function to help us survive droughts. Increasing beavers on federal lands in particular will help store water in mid and high elevation parts of our watersheds, releasing it during the dry season and during the drought to private lands below. And as Professor Beshta pointed out, even though the harvest numbers are low today compared to recent decades, our beaver populations are much lower than they were historically and much lower than the landscape can sustain, particularly on public lands. Your decision today to close federal lands to beaver trapping will show strong leadership in how ODFW will manage fish and wildlife in the face of climate change and meet its multiple obligations to Oregonians, tribal nations, recreationists, and fish and wildlife. A failure to make this decision today misses a chance to implement an inexpensive, self-sustaining, nature-based strategy that will benefit all Oregonians. We need to think of beavers not just as fur-bearing wildlife. They are ecosystem engineers, and they are climate resilience engineers. I care very deeply about Oregon rivers and watersheds, and the fish and wildlife and human communities that depend on them. That's why I'm here. I urge you to direct ODFW staff to close our federal public lands to beaver trapping and hunting and set in motion much needed beaver-driven landscape scale restoration. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Patricia. And we'll go to Robert Hughes.
Good afternoon. I assume you can hear me.
We
Sorry
can't
for
hear
all
you
this.
yet. Say it
Can you hear me
again.
now?
We can hear you better now.
Okay. Thank you for thoroughly addressing the importance of beaver in this exhibit, both Exhibit E and F. I have a PhD in fisheries from Oregon State University, the beavers, as Bob Beshta may have mentioned, and I'm a past president of the American Fisheries Society, a fellow of the American Fisheries Society and the Society for Freshwater Sciences, the editor-in-chief of Water Biology and Security, again, Water Security, which is an international journal. And personally, I enjoy trout angling in beaver ponds throughout the state and other places in the West with my son. I'm a resident of Benton County. It's common knowledge that beaver increase habitat quality by building ponds, side channels, undercut banks, as well as increasing the amount of large wood in surface waters. Such increases in habitat quality and richness increase juvenile coho abundance and survival, trout abundance, size and survival, fish and insect taxa richness and abundance, and most importantly, such habitat heterogeneity mitigates the effects of human pressures on fish and insect taxa richness and abundance. We've demonstrated this in national studies throughout the conterminous United States. Regarding the statements of that there are no effects of closures, I have to ask, what was the study design that can document that? What was the statistical power of that study? What was the likelihood of a type 2 statistical error? That is, no observed effect when there was an actual effect. And there is also the statement that more beaver occur in harvested areas than in closures. I'd have the same concerns as I had above, plus their confounding correlation with causation. The fact that there are more beavers doesn't mean that it was a function of closure opening. So in summary, I recommend more closures, at least on as many public lands as possible, translocating beavers to those lands to increase the rate of colonization, and a long-term study design to actually measure the effects of those closures on beaver distribution and connectivity. So thank you very much for your time. I know this is not an easy issue, but I hope to deliberate and come to a resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. And for the audience, though it was a little hard to hear, I believe that we have a letter from him as well with those same comments, because there were comments in there that I remember reading, and I think they were his. So we did get the information. So will Ernie Nemi, Stan Steele, and Jacob Shockey come up, please? And after that, Suzanne Foudy, Jeffrey Baldwin, and Adam Bronstein. And so Stan, if you'll start. Sorry, Ernie, you start. Just push the bar at the bottom and make it red. There you go.
Okay, make it red. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Ernie Nemi. I'm very pleased to be here. I celebrate your work, Chair Wall, members of the commission, and now the missing. Oh, there you are in the back. For 40 years, I have studied the economic importance of natural resources in this state. I currently am president of a consulting firm called Natural Resource Economics. I grew up in Klamath County, so I'm very familiar with the surroundings right here. I want to build on the scientific information that I think you have heard, that the actions you make concerning that will impact future beaver populations is a big deal. I first want to talk about how that big deal intersects with climate change from an economic perspective. I have overseen the 2 studies in Oregon of the economic importance of climate change to Oregonians. The most recent of these in 2018 concluded that by the middle of this century, the cost Based on data in 2018, by the middle of this century, the cost would be about $15,000 per household per year. I currently am a member of a brand new team that's trying to update that information. We currently estimate that the largest immediate impacts on the state of Oregon will come from heat, water, fire, and ecosystem collapse. I've understood the scientific information has been presented to you that the decisions you make about beaver populations will affect all four of those. So when you integrate the economic importance and the beaver importance of science, it really is a big deal. Next, I want to talk about how the department has viewed the economic importance of beaver populations. And to facilitate that, please bear with me when I talk about an experience I had last week, meeting with the Air Force pilots who fly the most sophisticated planes in the world. Their training on the surface is about how to avoid getting killed by the bad guys and how to kill the bad guys. But what it really means is how to avoid getting trapped flying behind the airplane. That is, flying based on the experience that you've just had rather than looking forward to the circumstances you are flying into. The staff have said there will be no direct impact from changes in beaver population. I just saw data that said that the increase in harvest went from 1,000 to 1,500. That's a really big deal. If you accept that economic information, that conclusion, you are flying way behind the economic airplane. Now, the concern is immediately about small businesses. Does that mean I have to stop the red?
You're out of time. So
Okay, I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry about the time. We just have to be fair to everybody. Sorry. Go ahead, Stan.
Chair Wall, Director Colbert, and Commissioners. I really do appreciate a lot of various perspectives on this issue because all of us care about beaver. All of us care about beaver modified landscapes. All of us care about climate change. I just don't think these are all really mutually exclusive issues. I don't think any of us should. But I really do think one thing we should understand here is we have an activity requested today to circumvent the beaver management work group process, which we all worked extremely hard on. It was arduous and it was contentious at times. Ernie and I even had some spats, if you could believe that. But the thing is, we're sitting at a table together looking what's best for Oregon beaver and what's best for the statute that requires policy to be made considering all user groups. That's 496.012. It's not mutually exclusive of any of the 7 tenets. You have to consider all those tenets when you make policy decisions. Not one over the other. They're equal sister tenets. So we could go on for hours about who the most probably educated people are in Oregon and where beaver are and what beaver do. And it isn't necessarily someone with a PhD. There's 4 or 5 trappers sitting in the back of the room. We understand this creature. We understand the habitat he needs or she needs. We understand reproductive rates. We understand that they vary in their habitats. And yes, we have hotspots. Those are high population density areas because the habitat oftentimes is adequate to have high populations. And you might see a higher removal some years than you see trends in other years. And sometimes that's market influenced, and other times it's because the trappers came back into an area that he hasn't trapped for 3 years because he is allowing surpluses to build and then reharvest. So there's a lot of issues here. I think it would be very premature for this policymaking board to not allow the Beaver Management Action Plan that the state's working so hard and that we embrace entirely. The reporting processes that were just talked about in the last hearing, we supported those reporting processes. Decisions have to be data-driven, not emotional-driven. I've been a trapper my whole life. I harvested 7 this year. two in the Alsea Basin. Yes, I harvested two in the Alsea Basin in a 360 square mile basin. At a population level, those of us who understand dynamics, it's not even measurable. Fish recovery on Oregon coho. Let's examine Oregon coho. How are they reaching recovery goals if we are having such a negative impact on habitat through beaver harvest? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stan. And sorry for the time limits.
That's fine.
Go ahead.
Chair Wall, Director Colbert, members of the committee. My name is Jacob Shockey, Executive Director of Project Beaver. Listening to this conversation, I thought I would come up and just give you two observations that I think are salient to what you're thinking about here. One is around your observation, Mary, around hotspots and what Derek Broman brought forward around. It seems like a lot of the trapping takes place on big river systems. Beavers are just like us. They like waterfront property. And if you're a beaver, you can live in a bank. You don't need to build a dam, to backflood anything. You've got lots of willows. You've got lots of deep water. That's the preferred habitat if you're a beaver. So people and beavers are choosing preferred habitat on picturesque rivers, right? And then you get people planting a Japanese maple tree that didn't co-evolve with beaver trimming, and the beavers trim it and they get worked up. And that's where we get a lot of conflict, right? These river people and river beavers. That's one observation. The hypothesis that follows from that observation is that all the good downstream benefits that we talk about with beaver dams that follow when they're up in the tributaries are less likely until they hit carrying capacity on these main stem rivers, because that's preferred habitat. Young dispersers aren't forced into tributaries until the preferred habitat is taken up, right? And so that's an important point when we start talking about trapping on the main stem, because that has population impacts on when beavers will hit that point where dispersers are forced into suboptimal habitat, especially because some of these streams are often degraded. It's not great. You're going to stay on the river if you can. So that's observation one. Observation two, not far from here, Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. I helped write a beaver management plan. 2 weeks ago, we had 50 community volunteers out doing a beaver scavenger hunt. Folks from mainly the Rogue Valley took off and spent all day looking for beaver sticks in a national monument. So it was pretty fun. We found one population. This is a monument that was set aside for biodiversity. And specifically, there's one spot there called Parsnip Lakes where Oregon spotted frog, it's the last population of Oregon spotted frog. The beaver dams that were maintained there until beavers were taken out maintain the frog habitat. And as the dams have collapsed, the water is getting more shallow and the egg masses are dying. So I keep trying to move beavers there. But when you relocate beavers that live in the valley and live on the river, they generally just migrate right back downstream. And so I'm seeding Klamath with beavers from the Rogue Valley, which is to say it's hard to get river beavers to stick in the mountains if you want them to. So I think those are just two observations I wanted to put out there for you. I think they're salient to today. And thank you for sitting in those terrible chairs all day. It's better on the cushions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your observations too. Thank you. We will go next to Suzanne Foudy, Jeffrey Baldwin, and Bronstein, and then we'll go to a bunch of online people. So Suzanne, if you'll start first and introduce yourself, go right ahead.
I would just like to direct the commission to the figure that I provided to Michelle. Chair Wall, Commissioners, and Director Colbert. I'm Dr. Suzanne Foudy, a retired Forest Service hydrologist and soil specialist. My research over the last 30 years has focused on water issues and how cattle, elk, and beavers alter stream systems. I live in Baker County in drought-prone Eastern Oregon. I am here with my colleagues to ask that you recognize that the needs of wild and human communities must take precedence over recreational activity, and that you vote to close all federally managed public lands in Oregon, sovereign tribal lands excepted, to beaver trapping and hunting as allowed by the Furbearer regulations. This request has received the strong support of Representative Mark Owens and Senator Lynn Finley, as evident by their letter of support that you have received, due to their concerns related to the water needs and the wildfire concerns in their district. While there may be enough beavers on these public lands to recreationally trap and hunt them, there are not enough beavers when it comes to transforming the thousands of miles of degraded stream, riparian, and wetland habitat back into landscapes of abundant and connected fish and wildlife habitat, natural fire breaks, and improved water quality and security for our community. The low numbers of beavers on these lands is supported by the large amount of unoccupied suitable habitat and the low take, as recently reported by ODF&W. Coexistence that is occurring on private lands means at some point dispersal will begin onto our federal lands. This is an opportunity. What we need to do is prepare those lands and allow them to receive beavers as they arrive without being trapped. Because protecting beavers from trapping and hunting eliminates a key mortality source that ODF&W controls, and it will allow numbers to increase. A large-scale closure is not a new strategy for Oregon. Oregon has successfully used this strategy twice in the past in response to water needs, and the published literature both also supports the outcome of increased populations and habitat. Selecting this strategy opens up opportunities as well for increased collaboration between federal and state agencies when it comes to restoring habitat on the landscape scale and addressing anticipated increased frequency of drought and wildfire. In fact, Senator Jeff Merkley secured beaver conservation language into the 2024 federal fiscal year appropriations bill. In part, it reads, federal land managers are encouraged to work with state wildlife managers on beaver conservation to make planning decisions that recognize beavers' environmental and ecological benefits and to identify locations where restoration of their habitat may be the most beneficial. Today, you hold the power to Today, you hold the power to affect change, to dramatically improve conditions for our fish and wildlife and human communities, especially our listed ESA salmon and steelhead stocks. We therefore ask that you make a motion and that it be seconded by the Commission to consider our request for a closure under the Furbearer regulations. We urge you to vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Could we go then to Jeffrey?
Jeff, please.
Okay.
Jeffrey's only when I'm in trouble with my mother. First of all, thank you all for what you do. I'm very impressed. Thank you. My name is Jeff Baldwin. I am a professor of geography. I recently retired from my tenure track position at Sonoma State University. I have published 5 studies addressing beaver recolonization in peer-reviewed journals. I just moved back to Oregon, where I've lived for over 45 years of my life. This is home for me. I'm not from California, and I'm very happy to be back. I am the one who made these maps for you that sort of show the extent of federal lands in Oregon. You are probably aware of the extent of federal lands in Oregon. I find it very interesting, not only the lands that are all one block, but all these smaller blocks that we have from the railroad deals from the earliest last century. But I want to do something else. I've decided to change what I want to talk about here. I want to talk about the benefits and the costs of keeping people from trapping on federal lands. The benefits, I think people have made clear. We will continue to make clear in the next several speakers. The costs are this. We're not going to restore habitat that we could have restored. And this is at a time when we're facing climate change that would add tremendous resilience to habitats that over 100 listed species for endangerment and threat in Oregon are under. We lose that. We will have less stream flow. We will have hotter stream flow throughout the summers across Oregon so that a few people can be excluded from trapping recreationally from 1% to 4% of their total take. The benefits are enormous. The costs are minimal. I ask you to do the right thing and consider seriously adopting this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Adam.
Commissioners, Director Colbert, congratulations. My name is Adam Bronstein. I'm the Oregon Director with a group called Western Watersheds Project. I live in Deschutes County. I'm a hunter and angler, a wildlife and public lands advocate. And I'm here to advocate for the closure of all federally managed public lands with the exception of tribal lands, to recreational hunting for beaver hunting and trapping. You have an opportunity today to do the right thing for all Oregonians here in the beaver state. This is not about stopping an activity that I don't like, nor is it an attack on those who engage in these activities, who love beavers and the natural world as much as me or anyone else. Right now, we are killing the goose that lays the golden egg. This cannot be the model for wildlife conservation in the 21st century. Let's leave them alone, at least on public lands. More elk, more mule deer, quail, grouse, spotted frog, habitat, you name it, beavers can help us. All of our species co-evolved with abundant beaver habitat. Beavers literally shaped our landscapes. Without these habitats, we will continue to be in a state of ecological poverty. I'm on public lands hundreds of days every year. I see it. It's getting very lonely out there. Protecting beavers is low-hanging fruit. There's no better investment to make right now in our fish and wildlife habitat. It's free and it will pay dividends forever. No heavy equipment necessary. Think of the possibilities. Imagine the green lines grow. You can see them from outer space. Fire breaks, wildlife refugia, clean water, water storage for farms and ranches and cities, biodiversity expansion, carbon drawdown. There are thousands of unoccupied stream reaches in the state right now. It will take a while to begin seeing the changes, but they will compound soon and in our lifetimes. The number of beavers taken off of public lands today might seem insignificant, but populations will grow if we let them. If we stop clearing out the watersheds, the benefits will come. The Blackfeet and other native tribes hold beaver to be sacred. Why? Because they serve us in the ecosystems we depend on. Fish and wildlife depend on the habitats they create, and fish and wildlife feed us. All wisdom is rooted in restraint. All wisdom is rooted in restraint. Let's move to return democracy to wildlife management on our public lands, the lands we hunt, fish, and gather. Private lands would remain open to trapping, and beavers could still be removed if they were hurting infrastructure, including culverts. And I see my time is out. But if you want more beaver modified habitats, we need beavers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it from all three of you. We will go then to David Moskowitz, Kate Kaufman, Amy Patrick. The next three after that, Meg Waller, Fran Recht, and Matt Orr. So David Moskowitz. Go ahead, David.
Okay, I can't quite tell. Okay, here we go. Thank you. David Moskowitz with the Conservation Angler. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I'd like to just quickly say to thank you to Michelle and her crew for allowing, making it through all the technical things and allowing all of us to testify remotely. And she does an incredible job. So I just want to say thanks before I run out of time. So I want to say, I'm going to start by saying that Stadley Sandsteel, who we've spent a lot of time in the legislature, but he's not correct about the primary goal of 496.012. Wildlife policy, predominant goal is the first sentence, and it's the policy of the state of Oregon that wildlife shall be managed to prevent serious depletion of any indigenous species. And the Attorney General of Oregon has weighed in on that in the past. That's important to keep in mind. There's a lot I'd like to say, but I'm going to just tell a story about harvest, because I think that's when I look at this program and the materials from the department, I worry about harvest. And I think that, like Chinook salmon, humans can and do disrupt population structure of animals. And the harvest of beaver is disrupting their structure and their benefits, the wide range of benefits that they provide. I'm going to tell a story about how Oregon can be wrong for quite a long time and resist this, and it has to do with coho. They used to measure coho populations at index reaches, where they were the best places for coho to spawn, and they just went to those places And there was always coho there, and they said, no problem with coho. Paul Engelmeyer, who testified starting off today, convinced the department, and it took years, but he said, you've got to do a random sample of survey sites to find out the true health of the population. When they started doing that, they realized that coho were almost to the bottom, maybe 30,000 fish. That citizen advocacy, going against the harvest mentality of the agency at that time, took courage and guts and perseverance. But Paul was right. And all the people who are speaking to you today are right as well. The harvest of beavers doesn't make sense. There's not enough scientific information to back up their claims about how many beaver are harvested. There's so many holes in that data. We have to go for some change, and that's my story. I'm probably out of time. Even if I'm not, I'm going to quit early, but I just want to say thank you so much for, you've heard me a lot today. I appreciate it. I hope it's been helpful, and happy to answer any questions if there's time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Let's go to Kate Kaufman.
Hi there. Thank you, Chair Wall and Director Colbert and the Commission. Again, I sit here as a concerned citizen with very little confidence that I have anything to add to this conversation because there's so many important people here advocating. What I will say is I wanted to speak to the emotionality versus data of this conversation and the timeliness of this conversation. We've been sitting on depleted numbers of beaver for over 200 years of the West Coast's existence under white colonization. The time is now to rectify those mistakes, and banning trapping is one way to support our reparations of our past actions. I will also say that as a younger person who has emotionally felt despair about climate change and any options or survival tactics that we could engage in, being here advocating for beaver and seeing beaver partnerships as a way to modify our future and to find resiliency and to find avenues for work, to find avenues for careers, has been one of the most uplifting things in my life. So the emotionality matters, and it matters because we all are seeking hope for something to change. And I hope that the people who resist this change can find the opportunity for excitement and new growth in their own lives as we try to let animals take care of us rather than us trying to take care of them. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Kate. Amy Patrick and then Meg Waller. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Amy Patrick. I'm the Policy Director for the Oregon Hunters Association. Chair Wall, Director Cole, I almost said Melcher, sorry. I was practicing that all afternoon. Director Colbert, and members of the Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon on this topic. This is one that many of us have been engaged on for a number of years now, about 4 years actually, since this topic was first brought up at the June 2020 meeting. And we've heard a lot this afternoon back and forth, and I'd like to anchor my testimony into 3 points. The first of that being process. Process is important when we are making decisions about wildlife management, and there are reasons why we have specific processes in place for the decision matrices placed before this commission. And while this request has a lot of emotion behind it and a lot of folks here to support it, this is not an APA petition. It does not fall into that category. It has not been filed to go through the rigorous stakeholder and staff process. And so for that reason, we have some big concerns about this moving forward within this meeting. The second point that I'd like to talk about is the data. I was really excited to see Derek's data. I saw it first in the Beaver Action Plan report out that happened last month. This man, if we had this data 4 years ago when this came up, I think that the year-long slog of the beaver management work group might have been a different thing. So I'm excited to see the data on this and to be able to look at the way that we can break that down into land ownerships and river features and the like. And that brings me to one of my main concerns about this request, and that is the data does not support this. 1% of 2023 harvest was done on federally managed lands. That is not a data point that supports a ban on an activity. Most definitely does not have data-driven support behind it. The area that I'd like to focus in on the most, though, are the good things. And I think that's something that gets lost in this conversation when we're talking about things that are highly polarizing, like a ban. Over the last 4 years, I just jotted down a quick list of things that we've done, both the commission in leading a lot of this, the agency staff, and a lot of us stakeholders. And the first of that being the beaver management work group that was put in place 4 years ago. And that was a long process, one, to get it started, and two, the actual process of the work group. I served on that work group, as did many people that you've heard from today. And I was also, I think, lucky enough to serve on the subgroup that did a lot of the background work, heavy lifting on the recommendations as well. That was a good thing. We had good recommendations that came out of that. The agency has the Beaver Action Plan that they've instituted. Clearly, we're seeing that has great benefit in data. We have the PFAs. I see you moving to the microphone. I'm wrapping up. We have House Bill 3464 that was just put through. We have lots of grants going through OCRF. There is a lot of good being done for beaver management and getting landscape level work on the actual landscape. And I think we need to focus in on that good work. I appreciate your time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Amy. Meg Waller and then Fran Reck. Meg.
Hi, can everyone hear me? I think my
Yes.
camera's not working.
We can hear you.
Awesome. Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Meg Waller. I'm the restoration manager for BARC. We're a nonprofit based in Portland. We focus on the Mount Hood National Forest. Primary focus of my job is identifying and sharing habitat areas within the national forest boundary that would be suitable for future beaver reintroduction. Also, I'm working on a streamlining a beaver reintroduction program in Oregon alongside many collaborators, including the Forest Service and the Oregon Zoo. I'm also, among many other people here today, to urge you to ban beaver harvesting on all federally managed public lands within Oregon. I'm heartened by the continual increase in beaver data and the specificity of that data, and I'm confident that it either shows or will show how the harvest of even a small number of beaver have a disproportionate impact on the ecological benefits and ecosystem services beaver provide. Additionally, relocation and coexistence are vital tools in the toolbox of beaver management. Streamlining the relocation process, permitting process would greatly increase our ability to avoid killing beavers by instead moving them to areas where they could cause less frustration while simultaneously enhancing habitat. Increasing funding and education around coexistence strategies on public lands would allow us to keep beavers in places while keeping culverts, roads, and campgrounds clear. I don't need to restate what the people before me have said, that beavers are incredible allies in protecting, preserving, and restoring the beautiful and valuable ecosystems we all cherish. As stated in the information summary provided, beavers are already being harvested at fairly low levels statewide and incredibly low levels on public lands. To speak to the person before me, I think although from one perspective, 1% is a negligible data point, and on the other side, I think it's such a negligible data point that it's hard to argue against cutting that 1% out of the harvest rate for the state, especially considering the outsized amount of ecological benefits it would have. I think banning trapping on federal public lands would be an incredible win for ecosystems and the humans that rely on them, while also, again, not making a huge impact on the people that are in the beaver trapping or federal land managing arena. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. We'll go to Fran Recht and then Matt Orr.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Director Colbert. This is Fran Recht. I bring my 30 years of experience working as Habitat Program Manager for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, though I'm speaking as an individual today. This is my third time in 6 years that I, like many of the others in the room, have come before you to testify in favor of a rulemaking change. The report your commission asked for in 2020 that was published in May of 2022 by the Beaver Management Working Group documents the well-known science about the benefit of beaver that we've all talking about today. This includes improved habitat conditions for 50 plus Oregon conservation strategy species, including ESA listed fish. This would include the threatened coho salmon on the coast where I live, where beaver created habitat is key to addressing the limiting factor of overwintering survival, and where both ODF&W and National Marine Fisheries Service data have documented the continued lack of such beaver habitat. The Beaver Management Working Group report states clearly in a number of places that ODF&W has sufficient justification to take immediate and direct actions now on large-scale strategies to maximize beaver-modified floodplains on these federal lands. It identifies hunting and trapping closures on these federal lands as a management tool that ODF&W could use to rapidly increase beaver-modified landscapes and achieve ecosystem benefits. The urgency and scale of our species and climate and drought problems means that the beaver emphasis areas being set up by ODF&W are insufficient to meet the challenges. To achieve and sustain the desired widespread benefits from beaver-modified landscapes, all beaver mortality that we can control, that is from recreational trapping and hunting, must be decreased on federal lands across the state. This closure decision is one that Oregon has used twice in the past when there were droughts to rebuild beaver populations. There's extensive drought now too. There are extensive fish and wildlife challenges. Beaver can help address these challenges, and we need you to enact such a closure now. We all wonder who will step up to address the climate crisis. We all know that each of us must do what we can. As Derek Jensen writes in the excellent book, Moral Ground, Ethical Actions for a Planet in Peril, it is long past time for brave women and men to do what it takes to protect this planet, our one and only home. It's long past time, he says, for us to be the miracle we've all been waiting for. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Matt Orr and then Amy Stewart.
Hi, I'm Matt Orr. And I appreciate you giving me a chance to describe briefly a study that we just finished on beaver dam analogs. I'm an associate professor at Oregon State University Cascades campus. I worked in collaboration with 5 other researchers on this project. It was on the South Fork of the Crooked River in Crook County. BDAs are structures that humans insert into the stream to mimic the dam building effects of beavers. And people have talked enough today about what those effects are. They get used in situations where beavers can't do this on their own for a variety of reasons. And they become a very hot topic in stream restoration. The punchline of our study is that humans can't mimic beavers very well, at least in the case of our work. Our study was a 7-year study. We showed positive effects on vegetation growth, namely streamside willow. And that was establishing willow. No negative effects on stream temperatures. However, each structure that we built took an average of 7 hours per year to maintain. And that didn't include transport time out to the site. When we stopped maintaining them, they were no longer functional. And so one of the main conclusions that came out of our study was that beaver are much better at this than we are. It's the first study to have documented maintenance efforts on beaver dam analogs. And I think it shows that beavers are a much more efficient and cost-effective way to implement beaver-based restoration, which of course makes sense because they're the beavers and we aren't. So I guess I'd just like to close by saying one of the things that inspired me to do this study was a book called 3 Against the Wilderness, which is about a trapper who noticed he was on a trapping allotment in British Columbia in the early 1900s, and all the beaver had been trapped out of his allotment. And he began trying to rebuild beaver habitat by hand on his own. And it only really took off when a game warden came in and delivered 2 beaver, fortunately one was a male and one was a female, to his site. And after that, the habitat around his cabin completely changed. And his interest in that was he wanted a fire break around his cabin. So even in the past, we have sort of a precedent for a trapper noting beaver as being distinctly different from the other animals that he was there to trap for their effects as ecosystem engineers. And it's really a wonderful book. So I'd recommend anybody take a look at it. 3 Against the Wilderness. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I've learned from this day that I don't have to tell people to stop. I just have to reach for the microphone, apparently. But thank you for observing those time limits. Amy Stewart.
Hello. Thank you, Chair Wall, members of the Commission, and Director Colbert for the opportunity to comment. My name is Amy Stewart. My husband and I are longtime residents of our frequently drought-stricken Crook County, and we're also avid hunters and anglers. I spent 31 years of my career as a fish and wildlife biologist with ODFW, finishing as the Deschutes Watershed Manager, so I know a little bit about fish and wildlife. I'm now co-leader of the Great Old Broads for Wilderness Bitterbrush Broadband of Central Oregon. Our chapter is part of a 10,000-member national grassroots organization, which works to protect wilderness in our public lands. We respectfully request a moratorium of beaver trapping and hunting on all federally managed lands to restore water security in our landscapes. This is not an emotional request, but a science-based request. We've seen the benefits of beavers in the Ochoco National Forest, where there's been a long-time moratorium, and on BLM lands on Bridge Creek, a tributary to the John Day River, where beavers have become reestablished. They have reconnected streams to floodplains, and in the case of ESA-listed juvenile steelhead and smolts in Bridge Creek showed dramatic increases in abundance, survival, and production. We are witnessing twin crises of climate change and loss of biodiversity. The recent drought we experienced was the worst in over 1,200 years, with 2023 as the hottest year in over 100,000 years, and it's going to get worse. It impacts our communities, agriculture, and fish and wildlife habitats. Natural climate solutions using beavers must play a critical role in Oregon's future. There are less than 170 licensed beaver hunters and trappers in Oregon out of over 400 million Oregonians. Derek Roman's presentation reported on beaver harvest, noting that 1 to 4% of the 1,000 to 1,500 beavers harvested in 2022 and 2023 were from federal public lands. Therefore, with only 30 to 50 beavers harvested by trappers, indicates a significant amount of unoccupied habitat. Removing harvest will have a negligible impact, therefore, on recreational harvest. So to accelerate recovery on public lands, every beaver must be saved and not harvested. Past trapping and hunting exposures in Oregon's history show that beaver populations can be restored with a moratorium. Eliminating trapping by a small number of trappers on federal public lands will benefit all Oregonians. We only ask for protection of the federal lands that comprise a little more than half of Oregon, and the caveat is nuisance beavers can be taken. The remaining lands are still open for trapping and hunting. In a recent interview on KLCC, a comment by Director Colbert really resonated with me. She said, "There is a sense of urgency to prepare for the future. Bring the best available science to inform our decision-making and put all the tools on the table to address species needs and maintain biodiversity for our state. So if you believe in making our best effort to restore native fish and wildlife, especially our most vulnerable species like ESA-listed salmon and steelhead, restoring our riparian areas, streams, and floodplains, and doing our best effort to modify impacts from drought, wildfire, and flooding, please take this important step to protect our state animal and restore water security for our landscape and communities." Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Amy. And I believe that that's the end of the testimony, the public testimony. And I would repeat something I said earlier today, which is, I hope you have some idea of how useful it is to have people this involved and taking the time to testify and passionate, as Commissioner Labhart said. When I hear the word emotional, I just think passion. So it's not a bad word. So let's bring staff back up. We have a chance for questions. So let's ask some general questions if you have them, or specifics, and we can then go quickly to comments from the commissioners. So commissioners, any questions? And I would look to see, and I know that it's unfortunate, very unfortunate, that we don't have Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde still here. She worked years on this process and on the Beaver work group and other pieces, but her son's graduating, so there you have it. Any questions? Let me start with just the easiest one in the world. I understood that we were going to have the annual report in August, but I heard you say today September, so I was planning for August. Did it change? We just
Chair Wall, I actually told you August and I was incorrect. It's actually scheduled for September.
Okay. Well, maybe.
Apologies.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure because we're looking at some pieces coming up that will be important to this one. Any comments at all that commissioners want to make? Nope. Then I would like to make a couple. Oh, go ahead.
When you're done. Go ahead.
Well, let me ask, actually, give me a minute to keep thinking and you go ahead. Yeah.
So I actually kind of debated with myself on whether I wanted to make comments or not, because I know this is such a passionate issue and there's not a person in this room or probably that's watching online that doesn't believe that beavers in riparian, what's the term? Beaver modified habitat in riparian areas have a tremendous positive effect on a variety of plants and animals and those kind of things. So enough said about that. So I'm going to kind of ramble just a little bit and then I'm going to try to close. When we looked at your chart, Derek, on beaver harvest, and particularly in that Willamette area, he had mentioned, I just want to clarify, and maybe it's a form of a question, but it looked like you clarified that the majority, the big blue boxes or the big blue circles there, it looks like most of that hotspot is identified as open water. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then the other hotspots looks like up on private land in Northwest Oregon. So, I think the majority of the folks that are testifying today, I'm putting words in their mouth, which is absolutely dangerous. But I think most people are thinking we need to restore these forest riparian areas from burn scars, from previous habitat modification, and beavers can do that, and they can do that greatly. And we're not talking about open rivers, open water like the Willamette River where there's bank beavers. I think that's my perception on what most of the people are talking about. And then there was a comment made about, on federally lands, and half of Oregon is federally land, BLM and Forest Service. 61 million acres of land is federal land. Now, a lot of that's not beaver habitat because it's desert, but 16 million acres is U.S. Forest Service. So 16 million acres. And of that 16 million acres, there's somewhere, I don't know who's arguing what point, but I think I'm correct to say between 1% and 4% of the harvest is occurring on federal lands, generally, right? And so it depends. And then there's another chart that you showed that the beaver harvest over the last 30 years is on about a 45-degree angle, it looks like downwards. Is that a fair statement? Okay. So I don't know, maybe 40% or whatever, but it's definitely going down. And so the point I'd like to make is that, and I had a long discussion with Adam. He's not here now, shoot. But I had a long discussion with Adam about this.
He's still here.
Oh, there he is. Okay, so it's my belief, in democracy, there's kind of both sides, and you work
and you try to compromise and you try to reach a compromise. That's, in my opinion, democracy. It's not all or nothing. We win, you lose, you know, but democracy, they talk it over and they try to find a compromise. And so I believe that that's what the commission did about 4 years ago. When beaver started coming on the radar screen, we heard you. We heard from the public that said we need to do something about this. And so, because the legislature, I mean, there's probably been multiple attempts at the legislature to take on the action, and they punted to a certain extent until recently, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the commission heard you, and we said, you know, this is a really important subject. And so we put together the beaver work group. And it was, you know, and we had 2 commissioners on that, Commissioner Zarnowitz and Commissioner Hatfield Hyde, and they participated. And Mary, I think you attended a few of them. Mm-hmm. And so there was a direction from the commission that we need to develop something that addresses the beaver, and it was the Beaver Action Plan. And so now we have a Beaver Action Plan, and we're in the process of implementing that Beaver Action Plan. So we started here, and I call it clicks. We started down here where there's a lot of concern about beaver. Click, we put the Beaver Action Plan in. And then the legislature started getting involved and said, you know, this is important. So Representative Marsh has pretty much taken it on. And so there was the House bill that passed. Click, we went up even more. So changed the designation. Click, moved it up. And then the last short session, Representative Marsh had proposed a voluntary funding program for addressing beavers with grants and those kind of things. Click. And then I sit on OWAB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and we have made a concerted effort to fund more beaver projects. Click. And then I sit on OCRF as an advisory member from the commission. OCRF, or Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund, has funded beaver programs. Click. You know, and so I think the legislature is going to pass Representative Marsh's bill next session, 25-27. Click. So I think there will be funding for beavers. We just need to give the Beaver Action Plan time to implement. We have the Trappers Organization that says, you know, we support the Beaver Action Plan. We have conservation groups that say we support the Beaver Action Plan. We have the department that says we got a Beaver Action Plan, so let's get this thing going. And so, in my opinion, we are click, 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 click. We hear you. We're doing something. Now, there are those that say you're not moving fast enough. You know, ban it on federal lands because it's only 4%. So you can argue that. Well, it's only 4%, so let's ban trapping on federal lands. And then the argument on the other side is, well, it's only 4%. What's the issue? The other 96% is occurring on private lands. So, you know, you can argue both of those viewpoints. But my opinion is I'm speaking for the commission, which is really dangerous, but we heard you. We heard the concern, and we are click, 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 and we're moving. We're maybe not moving as fast as other people, but in my opinion, let's let the process work. And so let's keep at it and keep going. It may not be going as fast as you like, but you know, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. We heard you. We're doing things. We're moving. There's a number of other organizations out there that have dollars and funding. NRCS is probably going to, Natural Resource Conservation Service is probably going to provide some significant funding, and talking to them about this, they see it as a major issue. The Farm Bill is going to be up again. I wish raw Renewable for America's Wildlife Act passed, because that would have given us probably millions of dollars to do habitat improvement projects, but it didn't pass. So, but anyway, there's a concerted effort to move this. I know it isn't going as fast as others would like, but just to say, nope, we got to stop. We got to ban everything on federal lands. I can't go there. So, thanks.
Thank you. 3 years ago or 4, whatever it was, when we first talked about this, we ended up putting our eggs in the basket, in 2 baskets actually, beaver modified habitat and non-lethal. And we did that for the reasons that you've heard over and over and over today. It's just, it was critically important then. It gets more and more critically important the beaver management work group and the beaver action plan resulted from that. And just the outcomes that have happened since then seem like serious headway to me. The beaver modified habitat, that is the metric that we're using now in Oregon is a big deal for me. It came as a result of these discussions. The direct result of, one of the direct results is that there has been a staff focus in the PFA, the private forest accord. I could think this morning, sorry. And the OCRF, which Commissioner Labhart just explained what it was, so I don't even have to remember it. Those have been, we have put budget, we said to staff in the last, you heard the budget stuff this morning, in the last one, 2 years ago, we said, this is a place where you have to put some money into what we're saying about beaver modified habitat. And we have done that. We have put that in, and it's to support beaver modified habitat. ODFW and partners and other entities across the state have put money and effort into protecting beaver and finding ways like the beaver modified area or the beaver management areas to support beaver modified habitat. We now have finer scope monitoring, and we know where the conflict hotspots are. The one that we talked about probably more than anything in the run up to the beaver modified habitat is that we are in this state looking for landscape scale approach. And we actually think we have, if we're not there with beaver modified habitat, we certainly have a start on it. And it's critical to start doing these things with with landscape scale approaches. There is zero joy in being on this commission and disappointing this many people with where we're headed with some. I find myself in the position of two things. One is sticking for a while with our approach that we have come up with, which is beaver modified habitat, working with people, putting serious money into beaver modified habitat and landscape scale solutions. And then, and this is the and, in September, we need to see two things. I only thought there was going to be one, but there are two things that we need to see. One of them is for those hotspots, and we heard a lot about it today, and I actually learned some stuff from listening to people today about why, about the beaver in those river systems. So we'll come back, we can come back to that in September. But I would like to, and I have talked with, it's not just me in this case, that we can check to make sure that it's okay with all the other commissioners or it's the sense of the commission. But in September, when it comes back, we could talk about hotspot options. And we have some that we've already talked about. That's the focus for non-lethal solutions, or a cap on high harvest areas so that there couldn't be more than a certain number, because in the Willamette, it seems like not so much, but there were 625 harvests in the upper, middle, and lower Willamette, which is significant. That's 625, that's a lot. And we could look at either that kind of a control, or it's a serious conversation about the ban, but I think that we are making headway, and I want to continue the headway. So I'm looking at the hotspots and the options that we have, but also there's one other piece, and this came up today, and it had come up before, and if Commissioner Zarnowitz were here, she would probably be asking this question instead of me, and that is, when we heard from staff, we heard we are harvesting, I don't think somebody said there was surplus, but we are harvesting and it's a robust population. But we also heard from people today, at least one person, that they are functionally extirpated. And that question was asked before. I would like it, maybe we could have a bit of discussion about that in September as well. Because if that's, if that's a pretty big difference in how we're hearing the population is. So those two things in September. And I find myself wanting to keep going with where we are right now to try to make more headway, because we have made really significant headway. And I didn't even say the part about the changing from predatory to a different brand on these animals. But what the department and the commission have done is look at landscape solutions, and that's important. It's just, and so that's where I find myself. So I want to make sure that I didn't for September, we have talked about those pieces, but not exactly. So since the commission, okay to do that. Thank you. Then is there any other question or comment? Otherwise, we should make a motion. Commissioner Khalil, you've been quiet for a while. Anything that you can lend to this or would like to?
Just listening, just listening. So many. I mean, it's wonderful to hear people so passionate about this animal that doesn't, just rides the brink of being a charismatic megafauna. So I'm always, I'm just listening to all the different sides of it. But I think you captured it well. There are so many little pieces of this that may need more definition or that we would like a little bit more clarity on, because we have to watch this very, very closely.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Well, I guess, you want me to read the
Fine, I'll read the motion. Happy to do it. I move to amend Oregon Administrative Rule 635, Division 045 and 050, as proposed by staff to set regulations and seasons for the harvest and pursuit of fur-bearing mammals.
I'll second that. And I might just mention, I wish Commissioner Hatfield Hyde was here.
It would be great. It's been moved and seconded to amend Oregon Administrative Rule Chapter 635, Division 045 and 050 as proposed by staff to set regulations and seasons for the harvest and pursuit of fur-bearing mammals. And we will do a voice vote on this one, if you will, Michelle.
King,
Yes.
Lavhart,
Yes.
Spellbrink,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
Wall.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Okay. I would say it borders on it, but you just go one statement and we have made our votes and we are, yes. Thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break. You're checking? After, let's be ready. And will whoever is going to do item H, if they will be ready right after that. So Brian, do you want to kick it off, or is Travis going to?
Chair Wall, Brian Wolfer, Wildlife Division Deputy Administrator. I'm here in case we have technical difficulties, and Travis Schultz, our Access and Habitat Coordinator, is going to give a real brief introduction.
Great. Go ahead, Travis.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Wall, members of the Commission, Director Colbert. For the record, I'm Travis Schultz, the Access and Habitat Coordinator. There are two projects before the board. An access project, the Alvord Ranch access area that provides critical access to the east side of the Steens, and a habitat project, the Metolius Winter Range acquisition, which purchases property in critical winter range and migration corridors. The other issue that we have before the commission today is the appointment of 2 hunter representatives. Wildlife Division, in consultation with Director Colbert, recommend reappointing Morgan Olson to a second term and appointing Truman Stone as a hunter representative to the A&H board. Do you have any questions?
Commissioners, are there questions? Commissioner Labhart.
So, Travis, I talked to Brian about this, but on the Metolius Winter Range acquisition, it wasn't a unanimous vote. And so I always question why we don't have unanimous votes on a Metolius River acquisition. It's a purchase of some property. A&H funds $200,000 and total project cost $425,000. So we're paying half of the cost of this. And I'm real sensitive, based on my past career, that when we're converting private land to public land, we need to make sure that we touch base with the county commissioners in that county and make sure that at least we've had a conversation with them, and make sure that they've been given an opportunity to weigh in. As I understand, that did not occur with Deschutes County. They don't even, I'm pretty sure they don't even know about it. And so there's in lieu of taxes that come up. And so I would just caution us in the future, if we could make sure that if we're using public funds to buy private property to convert to a public use. In this case, it's going to the National Grassland, or let's see here. It's a federal agent, federal grasslands, I think it is, Brian, right? Yeah. So just make sure that we touch base with the counties and make sure that we've had at least their input on that. And that's why one of the A&H members did not vote on it, because he said the abstention indicated desire to see support from county commission, felt the stakeholders should have done more outreach to obtain county commissioner support. I'm still going to vote for it, but I would caution that we make sure this doesn't happen again. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Good point. Other thoughts or comments? Brian, any response from you or Travis on that one? Is it, I mean, we've done this in the past and made real sure on the checking with the county commissioners. Could you just comment?
Chair Wall, yeah. I think the one quick comment I'd make is that this is not an acquisition that would go into department ownership. It would go into Crooked River National Grasslands. And my understanding is Crooked River National Grasslands has within their plan very explicit desire to, or action to pick up inholdings, some of the private inholdings within that. And they've been talking with the county about that, but I'm not sure how much discussion was made over this 298 acres specifically. And so, yeah, we take those comments to heart, and to the extent we can, we'll be pushing those applicants for funds to make sure those pieces happen before they come to the board.
Thank you. Commissioner King.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Just a question about the two folks, the reappointee and then Truman Stone as the hunter rep. Could you explain to me how these people come to you, how they apply, how you find them, things like that? What's our pool of candidates like?
Sure, excellent question. Commissioner King, Chair Wall. We put out the request for applications. That gets sent to sporting groups. It gets put out on kind of next door apps. It gets sent out through social media. We advertise in a bunch of different ways to try to pull in candidates from all over Oregon to get the best and most diverse candidate pool we can from all of our hunters that may have interest in it. We had an excellent, as you saw with those applications, we had a really excellent a group of candidates that applied for the position.
And what made you pick, like you said, there were several good choices, it looked like. What made you choose this person?
So for Morgan, he's done a phenomenal job with the board. Is an excellent representative for the board, and as well as an ambassador to hunting groups and to the organizations for hosts at auctions and other events that we go to as part of the A&H program. And then Truman Stone was right at the top with all of with 5 other phenomenal candidates. What put him over the top is he was a previous regional hunter rep and chair for the Northwest A&H Regional Council. And so he had a lot of experience with the A&H program and his processes as well. A lot of volunteer work with kids that was really great. And so he was selected based upon that. But like I said, a phenomenal group of applicants. We could almost add any of them do it well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Labhart.
Make a motion?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first, before I make my motion, I would just like to, there's 11 candidates, which is huge. I just can't thank whoever was out there soliciting these applications, because we got to, sometimes we have trouble getting a successful candidate list. So thank you for all of those 11 people that applied. So, Madam Chair, I move to reappoint Morgan Olson to serve a second term and appoint Truman Stone to serve a 4-year term as the landowner representatives and on the Access and Habitat Board.
I'll second that.
Did you also do the other part about?
Oh, whoops, we've got the other part.
Do we do them one at a time?
Do we need 2 motions, or is one? Can we do one?
You can do them together if people feel split on them.
Okay, Madam Chair, I also move to appoint, approve both projects recommended for funding by the Access and Habitat Board.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve both projects recommended for funding by the Access and Habitat Board, and it has further been moved to reappoint Morgan Olson to serve a second term as read into the record. Could we have a thumb vote on this one, please, commissioners? Those in favor? And it looks like it's unanimous. Thank you. Let's move then. Thank you, Travis. Let's move to Exhibit H. Travis again, huh? Okay, Travis, I think you're up again.
That is correct. Yeah. Again, for the record, Travis Schultz, Access and Habitat Coordinator. Do I need to put the slide up, or does that happen automatically?
In case you didn't hear that, Travis, he's trying to put it up right now. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so this is pretty much exactly the same. It is exactly the same as last year for the big game raffle and auction tags. No changes here. All of our programs have this is becoming an ever larger portion of our funding for both A&H program as well as for pronghorn, bighorn sheep, and Rocky Mountain goat management and research in the state. Any questions? If you have any questions.
We do. Just one second. Go ahead, Commissioner Labhart.
It's just a comment. I had the privilege of attending with Dawn it's called the Wild Sheep Foundation now, right? Banquet in Bend, and that auction tag was for well, there was actually two, wasn't there? Or just one? Combo two. And I was blown away by the amount that it was a deer and an elk tag, and it sold for
Frightening amount of money.
a striking amount of money, and knowing full well that, you know, this is going to go to A&H. And so it just, and it's the various groups around the state that put on these various tags and auctions for these various things. And I mean, they go all out to try to get as much money as they can out of people that probably don't have the money, but maybe some have deep pockets. But I was extremely impressed with the commitment that citizens of this state and maybe out of state were paying for the opportunity and commitment to fund these kind of programs. It was pretty impressive for me. So.
Thank you. That's great. Commissioner King.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Wall. Just a question, remind me again, Don, or you probably can prattle it all off. What do these things pay for again? I know they pay for us to fly around in helicopters and all sorts of things.
Chair Wall, Commissioner King, for the record again, Don Whitaker, Ungulate Program Coordinator. And Travis and I are both up here because there's two separate kind of programs here. The access and habitat tags pay for access and habitat and the projects, and these auction and raffle tags contribute to the surcharge on licenses, I believe.
They
add to it. So those are the two primary sources for the access projects and the habitat projects under the A&H program. The sheep raffle and auction, the pronghorn raffle and auction, and the Rocky Mountain goat raffle and auction are dedicated specifically by their enabling statute to be used for management and research of those three specific species. And that keeps us like leader in the sheep world, the wild sheep world. It pays for Hell's Canyon and the initiative and the activities there, as well as all of our sheep disease research. The pronghorn funds have been instrumental in documenting migration corridors and habitat resource selection use. We've now mapped movements in pronghorn, and those analyses are ongoing right now, but probably 95% of our viable range in Oregon, but literally the entirety of Southeast Oregon. And then Rocky Mountain goat, there's been fewer projects on that, but it funds those, and we're stepping up our efforts to conduct more research on Rocky Mountain goats because they're kind of the underdog of the big game world. There's been very little work done on them in the state, so we're ramping that up right now to get that going.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spellbrink, you have a hand on your card. I bet you're about to say something.
Just gonna say, I wish we had something like this to sell on the fish side.
Is there a motion on this one, commissioners?
I can do that. I move to approve the 2025 auction and raffle big game tag allocations as proposed by staff and the A&H board and shown in attachments 2 and 3.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the 2025 auction and raffle big game tag allocations as just read into the record. Commissioners, those in favor, could we have a thumb vote? And Commissioner Khalil.
Yes, I am off camera, but I vote yes.
Thank you. It's unanimous. The second was Commissioner Labhart. Thank you. And thank you, Travis, and especially for sticking all day with this and waiting until the end. Let's move then to item J, which is back to issue we had a while ago, the southern resident orcas. And we have John North here, as well as Howard Takata, who is serving as the Orca listing coordinator for us. And I believe he's online, right? And maybe Mike Brown, is he also online? Or you're going to do it by yourself? Go ahead, John.
Good evening, Chair Wall, Commissioners, and Director Colbert. I think
Thanks, John.
I had to get that in there. For the record, my name is John North, Deputy Fish Division Administrator for the Marine and Columbia River Programs. And joining us remotely tonight is Howard Takata, acting Southern resident, conservation coordinator, and Mike Brown, our marine mammal program leader. Today, we are here to summarize the actions required after the southern resident orcas were listed last February under the Oregon Endangered Species Act. And part of that includes helping you, the commission, to determine which state agencies own or manage land that can play a role in the recovery of southern residents and their conservation. And since Howard has been the lead in this post-listing work, I will turn it over to him to walk you through the rest of our fairly brief presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Howard.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Wall, Commissioners, and Director Goldberg. For the record, my name is Howard Takata, Southern Resident Orca Conservation Coordinator. And I'll begin with some background on the post-listing process for endangered species. When a species is listed as endangered under Oregon's Endangered Species Act, the listing affects management decisions that are made on state-owned or managed lands. For the purposes of the OESA, lands include state waters, which is especially relevant for an aquatic species such as orcas. Although an OESA listing does not directly affect private lands, this isn't an issue for orcas since the marine waters that they inhabit in Oregon, along with the adjacent shoreline, are publicly owned or managed. Oregon's territorial sea extends from the coastline seaward for 3 nautical miles, and thanks to the 1967 Oregon Beach Bill, all 362 miles of Oregon's coastline are under public ownership or has a public easement. State landowning and managing agencies whose lands or waters can play a role in SRO conservation are required to develop an endangered species management plan. This plan must be completed and approved by the agency within 18 months of listing, and the plan must also be approved by the Commission within 24 months of listing. The survival guidelines that the Commission adopted for SROs in February serve as interim protection measures for the species until the management plans are approved. Within 4 months of listing, the Commission is required to determine which state agencies own or manage lands or waters that can play a role in SRO conservation. To make this determination, the Commission must consult and coordinate with the applicable state agencies. During this process, the Commission and state agencies need to consider SRO biology and the geography of the land base to determine if the species or its habitat is found on state land or in state waters. If the species or its habitat is found on land or in waters owned or managed